Welcome to Uniarch Learning Hub. In this episode, we are going to talk about network configuration of IPC. We will introduce network, DNS, and port settings of IPC. Let's now get started. IPC has three methods for obtaining IPv4 address: static, PPPoE, and DHCP. A static IP address is simply an address that doesn't change. If the camera gets connection to the network by a static IP address, we are required to set a fixed IP address. Input the IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway address. Make sure that the IP address of the camera is unique in the network. PPPoE combines two widely accepted standards, Ethernet and PPP, to provide an authenticated method of assigning IP addresses to client systems. If the camera is connected to the network through point-to-point over Ethernet, PPPoE, then switch the IP obtaining mode to PPPoE, and input the username and password provided by the Internet Service Provider, ISP. If the DHCP server is deployed in the network, the camera can automatically obtain an IP address from the DHCP server. Most routers can serve as DHCP servers. The camera also supports IPv6 adding manually. MTU, maximum transmission unit, range from 576 to 1500 for IPv4 and 1280 to 1504 for IPv6. Here offers you multiple options for operating mode, with auto negotiation being the most commonly used. Domain Name System, DNS, enables us to turn domain names into IP addresses. It is recommended to set DNS by default. Now let's move on to port settings. Currently, our IPC can map three kinds of ports. HTTP port is Web Access Port. HTTPS port is Encrypted Web Access Port, and RTSP port is the live streaming port. Generally, there is no need to modify these default port numbers. Port mapping allows services in private networks to be connected with other public or private services over the Internet. Turn port mapping on and configure it below. Mapping type includes UPnP and manual. If the router supports UPnP, both methods above will work. But it's advisable to go with UPnP, as this way can save you much trouble. We choose UPnP as the mapping type and select Auto here. The camera and router will configure available ports and be mapped automatically. Then users outside the LAN are therefore able to access the camera. We can choose UPnP mapping as manual as well, and then fill in the available port numbers manually. If the router doesn't support UPnP, we need to switch mapping type to manual, and manually configure the port numbers on both the IP camera and the router sides. The active status tells that mapping works successfully, while inactive indicates that the port is occupied. That's all for today's learning. Hope this will be helpful to you. Thanks for your watching. See you next time.